Cleopatra was not just Egypt's last pharaoh, she was also its last dreamer. While Rome sharpened its swords and polished its politics, Cleopatra sat in her palace wondering, what if I built a pyramid, but nobody knew? It was the kind of thought that sneaks into your head late at night, somewhere between reorganizing papyrus scrolls and wondering if cats secretly rule the world. Egypt already had plenty of pyramids, and they weren't exactly subtle. The Great Pyramid of Giza was basically the ancient world's version of a billboard screaming, "Look at me." But Cleopatra wanted something different, something hidden, something personal, something that whispered instead of shouted. Her reasoning was layered, like a badly wrapped mummy. Legacy: she wanted to join the ranks of the great pharaohs, but with her own twist. Secrecy: Rome was watching, and she didn't want her pyramid mocked as Cleopatra's DIY project. Mystery: she loved the idea of future generations stumbling upon her hidden monument and saying, wait, did she really do this? It was equal parts ambition and mischief. Cleopatra wasn't just building stone, she was building suspense. Rome was everywhere in her life, in her politics, her romances, her headaches. Julius Caesar had already left his mark, and Mark Antony was waiting in the wings. Cleopatra knew that any grand project would be scrutinized. A secret pyramid was her way of saying, I'll leave my mark, but I'll do it on my own terms. Of course, the idea was ridiculous. You can't build a pyramid quietly. It's like trying to bake a cake the size of a mountain and hoping nobody smells it. But Cleopatra thrived on the impossible. She had smuggled herself into palaces, charmed generals, and balanced Egypt on the edge of collapse. Why not add secret pyramid architect to her resume? And so, Cleopatra's desire for a hidden pyramid became more than a whim. It was a symbol of her defiance, her creativity, and her refusal to let Rome define her. She wanted a monument that was hers alone, tucked away in the sands, waiting for history to uncover it. Cleopatra's dream of a secret pyramid did not exist in a vacuum. It unfolded against the backdrop of Egypt's slow decline and Rome's unstoppable rise. To understand why she wanted to build something hidden, we must first wander through the dusty corridors of history, where grain shipments, taxes, and Roman senators all play their part. Egypt, once the shining jewel of the ancient world, had become a land of fading grandeur. The pyramids of Giza still stood proudly, but they were relics of a past age. The Nile continued its eternal rhythm, flooding and receding. But the wealth it produced was increasingly siphoned off to pay debts and bribes. Cleopatra inherited a kingdom that was magnificent in memory, but fragile in reality. Meanwhile, Rome was busy flexing its muscles. Its legions marched across continents, its generals plotted in smoky taverns, and its senators argued endlessly about who should sit on top of the political pyramid. Metaphorical, not limestone. Rome was hungry, and Egypt was a tempting feast. Grain from the Nile fed Roman citizens, and Cleopatra knew that her country's survival depended on balancing diplomacy with defiance. This imbalance shaped her secret pyramid plot. She wanted a monument that would remind Egypt of its greatness, but she couldn't flaunt it openly. Rome's eyes were everywhere. A giant pyramid rising in the desert would have been seen as a statement of independence, perhaps even defiance. And defiance was dangerous when Rome had more soldiers than Egypt had donkeys. The decline of Egypt was not just political, it was cultural. The old traditions of pharaohs building colossal tombs had faded. Temples still rose, but they were smaller, less ambitious. Cleopatra's idea of reviving pyramid construction was almost nostalgic, like someone deciding to bring back floppy disks in the age of smartphones. It was bold, but it was also impractical. Rome's rise, on the other hand, was relentless. Julius Caesar had already crossed paths with Cleopatra, and Mark Antony would soon follow. These Roman figures were not just allies or lovers. They were reminders that Egypt's fate was tied to Rome's whims. Cleopatra's pyramid dream was her way of saying, Egypt still matters, Egypt still builds, Egypt still dreams. And so, Chapter 3 reminds us that her secret pyramid was not just about stone and geometry. It was about pride in a time of decline, about resistance in the face of Rome's dominance, and about a queen who refused to let her kingdom fade quietly into history. Now, before you drift off, remember, like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you'd build your own pyramid, or if you'd just settle for a sandcastle. Cleopatra's pyramid dream was not only about stone and secrecy, it was also about symbols. If you believe the whispers of half-lost papyrus scrolls, her architects were instructed to embed hidden messages into the blueprints, not practical notes, like don't drop this block on your foot, but cryptic symbols, riddles, and little jokes that only insiders would understand. The Egyptians had always loved symbolism. Hieroglyphs were not just writing. They were art, puzzles, and sometimes even puns. Cleopatra wanted her secret pyramid to be more than a tomb. She wanted it to be a coded message to the future, a monument that spoke in riddles. Imagine the scene. A group of weary architects hunched over papyrus, sketching triangles and lines, while Cleopatra leaned over and whispered, "Make sure the angles spell my name backwards." One architect probably sighed and muttered, "Majesty, geometry doesn't work that way." Another might have doodled a cat in the corner just to amuse himself. The hidden messages were said to include stars and constellations, alignments that pointed not to the obvious heavens, but to secret meanings, numerical codes, ratios that hinted at Cleopatra's reign, disguised as measurements, playful hieroglyphs, tiny drawings of donkeys, jars, or sandals tucked into the margins, like ancient Easter eggs. Of course, secrecy was difficult. Workers gossip, papyrus gets misplaced, and Rome had spies everywhere. If a Roman envoy stumbled upon one of these blueprints, he might have thought Egypt was planning a geometry competition rather than a pyramid. The humor of it all is that these hidden messages were probably more confusing than enlightening. Future archaeologists would scratch their heads, wondering why a blueprint for a pyramid included a doodle of a fish wearing a crown. Cleopatra, however, would have smiled. For her, the pyramid was not just stone. It was a story, a puzzle, a legacy wrapped in riddles. And so, this reminds us that her secret pyramid was not only about hiding construction from Rome, but also about hiding meaning within meaning. It was a monument designed to whisper across centuries, even if the whispers sounded more like inside jokes than profound wisdom. Cleopatra's secret pyramid plot needed a location, and this was no simple matter. Egypt was full of deserts, but not all deserts were equal. Some were too close to villages, where gossip spread faster than the Nile in flood season. Others were too rocky, too sandy, or too full of donkeys who would loudly bray at midnight construction crews. Cleopatra wanted a place that was forbidden, mysterious, and ideally far enough away that Rome's spies would get bored halfway through the journey. Choosing the site became a comedy of contradictions. Advisors suggested the western desert, but it was already dotted with temples and tombs. Someone proposed the eastern desert, but merchants constantly passed through with caravans of spices and gossip. Another suggested the Sinai, but Cleopatra frowned. Too many rocks, not enough glamour. She wanted a desert that whispered secrecy, not one that shouted inconvenience. The Queen's council meetings must have sounded like travel brochures gone wrong. Majesty, this desert has excellent sand quality, but the wind is terrible. This one is quiet, but the scorpions are unfriendly. Cleopatra listened patiently, then declared, "We shall choose the forbidden desert, the one nobody dares to enter." Of course, the problem was that if nobody dared to enter, how would workers haul thousands of limestone blocks there? In the end, the forbidden desert was less mystical than it sounded. It was simply a stretch of land far enough from Alexandria to feel secret, yet close enough to still be practical. Farmers nearby pretended not to notice when caravans of stone passed through at night. Traders whispered about strange activities in the dunes. Rome's envoys raised eyebrows but had no proof. The humor of the choice lay in its futility. You cannot hide a pyramid, no matter where you build it. Even in the most remote desert, its triangular silhouette would eventually betray itself to the horizon. Cleopatra's forbidden desert was less a solution and more a symbol, a place where she could pretend secrecy was possible, even as the sands themselves conspired to reveal her ambition. Her chosen location became part of the legend, a desert that held the foundations of a dream, half built, half forgotten, waiting for history to wonder what might have been. Cleopatra knew that building a pyramid was not just about stone and sweat, it was also about ritual. In Egypt, every great monument carried spiritual weight, and no pharaoh dared to raise a structure without the blessing of the priests. But since her pyramid project was meant to be secret, she could not summon the entire priesthood in broad daylight. Instead, she arranged midnight meetings, cloaked in shadows, where whispers carried more power than proclamations. The priests of Egypt were accustomed to grand ceremonies, incense, chanting, processions that lasted longer than most people's patience. Cleopatra, however, demanded discretion. She invited only a handful of trusted priests, those who could keep their mouths shut even when bribed with honey cakes. They met in hidden chambers beneath temples, where the flicker of oil lamps cast long shadows on walls covered in hieroglyphs. There, Cleopatra explained her vision, a pyramid built not for public glory, but for eternal secrecy. The priests listened, stroking their beards, occasionally nodding, occasionally dozing off. One of them asked, "Majesty, how do you expect us to bless a pyramid nobody is supposed to know exists?" Cleopatra smiled and replied, "Whisper the blessings. The gods will hear." The rituals were adapted for secrecy. Instead of grand sacrifices, they offered small tokens, a jar of wine poured quietly into the sand, a loaf of bread buried beneath a stone. Instead of loud chants, they murmured prayers, so softly that even the desert wind seemed louder. Cleopatra insisted that every stage of construction, from quarrying stone to hauling blocks, be accompanied by these hushed ceremonies. The humor of these meetings lay in their contradictions. Priests who were used to booming voices now whispered like conspirators. Sacred rituals that once filled temples now took place behind closed doors, with Cleopatra leaning in to remind them, "Quieter, please. Rome has ears everywhere." And yet, these secret blessings gave her project a strange legitimacy. Even if the pyramid was never completed, the rituals tied it to Egypt's spiritual tradition. The priests may have grumbled, but they obeyed, knowing that their queen's ambition was as much about the gods as it was about geometry. Thus, Cleopatra's midnight meetings became part of the legend, gatherings where faith and secrecy intertwined, where pyramids were blessed in whispers, and where Egypt's last queen tried to bind her hidden dream to eternity. Cleopatra's pyramid dream could not survive on whispers and rituals alone. She needed architects, but not the ordinary kind who strutted about in daylight, bragging about their angles and measurements. No, she required a special breed, underground architects, men and women who could design in secrecy, sketch in shadows, and keep their mouths shut even when bribed with figs. Recruiting them was a delicate affair. Cleopatra could not simply post a notice on the temple wall. Wanted, discreet pyramid builders must enjoy sand. Instead, she relied on coded invitations. Trusted messengers carried papyrus scrolls folded into odd shapes, each bearing cryptic lines like, "Meet at the third dune after sunset. Bring your ruler, but not your ego." The architects who answered were a curious bunch. Some were veterans of temple construction, their hands calloused from years of chiseling stone. Others were dreamers, obsessed with geometry, who saw triangles in everything, pyramids in bread loaves, pyramids in sandals, pyramids in the way cats curled up to sleep. Cleopatra welcomed them all, provided they swore secrecy. Meetings were held in hidden chambers beneath Alexandria, where oil lamps flickered and sand trickled through cracks in the ceiling. Cleopatra would enter, draped in silk, and announce her vision. "We shall build pyramids again, but quietly." The architects nodded, though one inevitably muttered, "Majesty, pyramids are not known for their subtlety." Their task was daunting. They had to design ramps that could be hidden, storage pits disguised as wells, and transport routes that looked like ordinary trade paths. One architect suggested disguising limestone blocks as giant loaves of bread. Another proposed carving them into shapes of statues, only to reassemble them later. Cleopatra listened patiently, smiling at their creativity, even when practicality was nowhere in sight. The humor of these underground architects lay in their contradictions. They were brilliant, but they were also eccentric. One insisted that the pyramid must align with the constellation of cats. Another demanded that the secret chamber include a mural of donkeys for balance. Cleopatra indulged them, knowing that secrecy required imagination as much as skill. And so, her team of underground architects became part of the legend. They were the unsung dreamers of Egypt, sketching triangles in the dark, whispering measurements into the night, and trying to solve the impossible puzzle of how to build a pyramid that nobody would notice. Cleopatra's secret pyramid plot faced its greatest obstacle not in stone or sand, but in silver. Building pyramids was expensive, outrageously so. Even the smallest block required workers, tools, transport, and bribes to keep mouths shut. And Egypt's treasury, already strained by Rome's demands and Cleopatra's political maneuvers, was not exactly overflowing with spare coins. The queen's accountants were a weary bunch. They had spent years balancing grain exports, temple expenses, and the occasional lavish feast. When Cleopatra quietly hinted that funds might be needed for a small, discreet construction project, their eyes widened. One accountant dropped his abacus. Another muttered, "Majesty, Pyramids are not small, nor discreet, nor cheap. Cleopatra insisted secrecy was possible, even in finances. She proposed disguising pyramid expenses as ordinary items. Stone blocks, listed as oversized bread loaves, ramps, and scaffolding filed under festival decorations. Labor, wages hidden as temple choir stipends. The treasury records must have looked absurd. Future historians would puzzle over why Egypt suddenly spent so much on bread and choirs. Cleopatra smiled, knowing that secrecy often depended on creative accounting. But Rome was watching. Taxes and tributes were carefully monitored, and any unusual spending raised suspicion. Cleopatra had to juggle her pyramid dream with the reality of keeping Rome satisfied. Grain shipments had to flow, debts had to be paid, and bribes had to be delivered. The pyramid project became a financial balancing act, where every coin had to be stretched, disguised, or hidden. The humor of the treasury problem lay in its futility. You cannot hide the cost of a pyramid, no matter how cleverly you label it. Even disguised as bread, thousands of blocks still drained the treasury. Cleopatra's accountants sighed, scribbled, and prayed that Rome would not notice the sudden spike in festival decorations. And yet, Cleopatra persisted. For her, the pyramid was not just stone, it was a statement. She was willing to risk financial chaos to leave behind a hidden monument. The treasury groaned, the accountants despaired, but the queen's ambition marched on, coin by coin, block by block. Cleopatra's pyramid dream faced one of its most absurd challenges: how to move thousands of massive limestone blocks without anyone noticing. It was the ancient equivalent of trying to sneak an elephant through a marketplace while insisting it was just a large cat. The plan was simple in theory, ridiculous in practice. Workers were ordered to transport stones under the cover of darkness. Caravans creaked along the Nile at midnight, their cargo disguised with laughable creativity. Some blocks were covered in cloth, painted to look like grain sacks. Others were stacked in ways that suggested festival decorations. One particularly ambitious worker tried to convince a villager that a block was simply a very large loaf of bread. The humor of these nightly operations was endless. Farmers along the river would wake to see mysterious shadows lumbering past, donkeys groaning under impossible loads. Strange, they whispered, Egypt seems to be moving mountains at night. Gossip spread, but Cleopatra insisted secrecy was intact. After all, if everyone was whispering, nobody was shouting. The logistics were exhausting. Stones slipped into the river, barges tipped under their weight, and workers cursed the gods of geometry. Supervisors tried to keep morale high by inventing songs about the noble art of midnight hauling. Cleopatra herself occasionally appeared, wrapped in a cloak, to encourage the workers. Remember, this pyramid is for eternity. Also, please don't drop that block. Rome's spies, of course, noticed. They reported strange movements along the Nile, unusual shortages of rope, and donkeys mysteriously disappearing from villages. But without proof, they could only speculate. Cleopatra's pyramid remained a rumor, a shadowy project whispered about in taverns and temples. And so, the smuggling of stones became part of the legend. It was a comedy of secrecy, a nightly parade of disguised blocks, and a reminder that even the greatest queen of Egypt could not hide a pyramid, though she certainly tried. Cleopatra understood that pyramids were not merely piles of stone. They were sacred monuments. Every block, every ramp, every grain of sand had to be blessed before it could become part of eternity. And since her pyramid project was meant to be secret, the rituals had to be performed in whispers, not in grand processions. The priests, already weary from midnight meetings, were summoned again. This time they were asked to bless stones before they were hauled into the desert. Normally, such ceremonies involved incense, chanting, and sacrifices that echoed through temple halls. But Cleopatra insisted on discretion. Instead of booming voices, the priests murmured prayers so softly that even the donkeys braying nearby drowned them out. Workers were instructed to pause before lifting each block. They would sprinkle a pinch of sand, pour a drop of wine, or mutter a quick prayer like, "Please don't let this crush my foot." Supervisors tried to keep order, but the rituals often turned into comedy. One priest accidentally blessed a pile of bread loaves instead of limestone. Another forgot his lines and improvised, declaring, "May this block be lighter than it looks." Cleopatra herself occasionally attended, cloaked in secrecy, watching as priests waved their hands over stones and workers bowed their heads. She believed these rituals tied her pyramid to Egypt's divine tradition, even if performed in hushed tones. For her, secrecy did not mean abandoning the gods. It meant inviting them quietly into her dream. The humor of these ceremonies lay in their contradictions. Sacred rites that once filled temples now took place in dusty corners, with priests whispering like conspirators and workers rolling their eyes. Yet the rituals gave the project a strange legitimacy. Even if the pyramid was never completed, the blessings ensured that its foundations carried echoes of Egypt's faith. Thus, the rituals before construction became part of the legend. Ceremonies performed in silence, prayers whispered into the desert night, and a queen determined to sanctify her hidden ambition. Cleopatra's secret pyramid was never meant to be just another tomb. She envisioned something deeper, stranger, and more mysterious, a hidden vault buried within the structure, a chamber that would hold treasures, scrolls, and perhaps even secrets too dangerous for Rome to discover. The vault was designed to be invisible to the casual eye. Ordinary pyramids had burial chambers that looters could eventually find, but Cleopatra wanted hers to be a puzzle. Her architects sketched elaborate plans, false corridors leading nowhere, trap-like passages that looped back on themselves, and doors disguised as solid stones. One even suggested painting hieroglyphs that read, "Nothing to see here," just to confuse intruders. Inside the vault, Cleopatra planned to store more than gold. She wanted papyrus scrolls containing her strategies, her alliances, her dreams. Some say she intended to hide maps of Egypt's secret trade routes. Others claim she wanted to preserve formulas for cosmetics and perfumes that gave her legendary charm. A few even whispered that she planned to seal away letters from Caesar and Antony, proof of her tangled romances, hidden forever in stone. The workers tasked with preparing the vault were sworn to silence. They dug at night, chiseling carefully, while priests whispered blessings over the walls. Cleopatra herself visited the site, cloaked in secrecy, inspecting the chamber with a lantern in hand. She imagined future generations stumbling upon it, marveling at the queen who dared to hide her legacy in a vault no Roman would ever find. The humor of the vault lay in its ambition. It was essentially Cleopatra's attempt to outwit eternity. She wanted a chamber that would never be discovered, yet she also wanted it to be remembered. It was like hiding a diary under your bed, but hoping someone would read it centuries later. And so, the hidden vault became part of the legend. Whether it was ever built remains uncertain, but the idea itself lingers, a secret chamber buried in the sands, holding the whispers of Egypt's last queen, waiting for history to wonder what secrets she tried to keep. Cleopatra's pyramid was not only meant to house treasures or confuse intruders with false corridors. Deep within its imagined heart, she envisioned a chamber dedicated solely to her legacy, a place where her story would be preserved, not in gossip or Roman propaganda, but in her own words and symbols. This chamber was to be more intimate than the grand vault. It would not overflow with gold or jewels, but instead hold carefully chosen artifacts that spoke of Cleopatra herself. Papyrus scrolls detailing her reign, her alliances, her philosophies, and even her personal reflections were to be sealed inside. Some say she wanted to include portraits painted on delicate panels. Others claim she planned to store perfumes and cosmetics, the very tools of charm that had captivated Rome's most powerful men. The architects designed the chamber with secrecy in mind. Its entrance would be hidden behind layers of stone, accessible only through a passage disguised as solid wall. Inside, the chamber would be small but elegant, lined with polished limestone, decorated with hieroglyphs that told her story in her own chosen way. She wanted future generations to see her not as Rome described her, a temptress, a schemer, but as Egypt's last great queen, a woman who fought to preserve her kingdom against impossible odds. Priests were instructed to prepare rituals specifically for this chamber. They whispered prayers of remembrance, asking the gods to guard Cleopatra's memory as fiercely as they guarded the Nile. Workers were told to treat the chamber with reverence, even as they hauled blocks in secrecy. Cleopatra herself visited the site in imagination, picturing her story sealed away, waiting for centuries to pass before anyone uncovered it. The humor of the plan lay in its contradiction. Cleopatra wanted the chamber hidden forever, yet she also wanted it discovered someday. It was like burying a diary in the sand, while leaving a note that said, "Please dig here in 2,000 years." Her legacy chamber was both a secret and a message, a paradox that reflected her restless ambition. And so, the secret chamber for Cleopatra's legacy became part of the myth. Whether it was ever built remains uncertain. But the idea itself lingers, a hidden room where Egypt's last queen tried to preserve her voice, her image, and her truth, safe from Rome's rewriting of history. Cleopatra's secret pyramid project was haunted not only by sandstorms and stubborn donkeys, but by Rome's ever-watchful eyes. Spies lurked everywhere, in markets, in temples, even among the workers who hauled blocks at night. Egypt's queen knew that every whisper could travel across the Mediterranean, twisted into a report for senators eager to mock her ambition. Rome had perfected the art of espionage. Their agents blended in as merchants, scribes, or travelers, always listening, always noting. If a worker grumbled about moving bread loaves the size of houses, a spy would jot it down. If a priest muttered about midnight blessings, another spy would report it as strange rituals in the desert. Cleopatra's pyramid was less a construction project. The queen responded with secrecy layered upon secrecy. Workers were ordered to speak in code. Limestone blocks became festival gifts. Ramps were market stalls, and the vault was the queen's pantry. Priests were told to disguise their chants as ordinary prayers. Even architects were instructed to sketch blueprints that looked like harmless temple renovations. Cleopatra believed that if Rome's spies saw only fragments, they would never piece together the whole. But paranoia grew. Cleopatra began to suspect everyone, servants, advisors, even cats, wandering the palace halls. She imagined Roman spies hiding behind baskets of figs, scribbling notes about her every move. The tension was exhausting, yet it fueled her determination. The pyramid was no longer just a monument. It was a defiance against Rome's surveillance. The humor of the situation lay in its absurdity. Rome's spies reported mysterious bread shipments, donkeys vanishing at night, and priests whispering into jars. Senators back in Rome probably laughed, wondering if Egypt had turned into a land of eccentric bakers. Cleopatra, however, knew the truth. Her pyramid was real, and secrecy was survival. And so, the fear of discovery became part of the legend. Cleopatra's hidden project was not undone by stone or sand, but by the constant shadow of Rome's spies, proof that even the greatest queen could not escape the gaze of an empire, determined to watch her every step. Cleopatra's pyramid dream was shaped not only by Egyptian tradition, but also by her entanglement with Rome's most famous general, Julius Caesar. Their relationship was political, personal, and theatrical all at once, and it inevitably seeped into her secret architectural ambitions. Caesar was a man of spectacle. He adored grand gestures, triumphal marches, and monuments that shouted his victories to the world. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, absorbed this flair for drama. When she imagined her pyramid, she wanted it to carry echoes of Rome's grandeur, but hidden beneath Egyptian stones. The architects whispered that Caesar's influence appeared in subtle details, symmetry and order. Roman engineering prized clean lines and balance. Cleopatra's pyramid designs leaned toward sharper geometry than traditional Egyptian styles. Vaulted chambers, inspired by Roman architecture, she considered adding curved ceilings within hidden rooms, a departure from Egypt's flat-roofed tradition. Symbolic fusion, hieroglyphs, were to be paired with Latin inscriptions, a quiet nod to her alliance with Caesar. Of course, secrecy complicated everything. Cleopatra could not openly declare that her pyramid bore Roman influence. To her people, it had to remain purely Egyptian. To Rome, it had to remain invisible. The result was a design that blended cultures in whispers, a pyramid that was Egyptian in body but Roman in spirit. The humor of Caesar's influence lay in its irony. Here was a queen trying to build a monument that nobody should see, yet she borrowed ideas from a man who lived for spectacle. It was like designing a secret diary with golden covers and expecting no one to notice. Cleopatra's pyramid, if ever completed, would have been a strange hybrid, Egyptian stone infused with Roman ambition. A monument that reflected not just her reign, but her entanglement with Caesar. It was less a tomb and more a coded message, proof that Egypt's last queen carried both Nile and Tiber in her imagination. If Julius Caesar's influence on Cleopatra's pyramid was about spectacle and Roman engineering, Mark Antony's role was far more mysterious and far more dramatic. Where Caesar brought order and ambition, Antony brought passion, chaos, and a flair for the unpredictable. Cleopatra, ever the strategist, saw in him not just a lover, but a partner who could help shield her secret project from Rome's suspicions. Antony was no architect, but he was a soldier, and soldiers understand logistics. Cleopatra whispered her pyramid plans to him in candlelit chambers, and Antony half amused, half bewildered, offered advice. "If you want secrecy," he said, "move the stones like an army. March them at night, disguise them as supplies, and keep discipline." His suggestions were practical, though delivered with the swagger of a man who thought every problem could be solved with a legion. Some legends claim Antony even visited the desert site, standing among workers and pretending to be a foreman. He supposedly barked orders in Latin, confusing Egyptian laborers who nodded politely while having no idea what he meant. Cleopatra laughed at his theatrics, but she appreciated his willingness to step into her dream, even if only for show. Antony's role was also symbolic. His presence gave Cleopatra confidence that Rome's gaze could be distracted. While Antony fought wars and stirred politics, Cleopatra believed her pyramid could rise unnoticed. He was her shield, her diversion, her partner in secrecy. Yet his unpredictability made him both an asset and a risk. One moment he was loyal, the next he was entangled in Roman politics that threatened Egypt's fragile independence. The humor of Antony's involvement lay in his contradictions. He was a general, pretending to be an architect, a Roman helping to hide a monument that defied Rome itself. Cleopatra trusted him, but she also knew that secrecy and passion rarely mix well. His role in the pyramid project was less about stone and more about distraction, keeping Rome's eyes elsewhere while Egypt tried to dream in silence. And so, Mark Antony's mysterious role became part of the legend. He was not the builder of Cleopatra's pyramid, but the shadow that allowed it to exist, however briefly, in the sands of secrecy. Cleopatra's secret pyramid dream was not undone by stone or sand, but by fire and war. Alexandria, her proud capital, was a city of brilliance, libraries bursting with scrolls, temples echoing with chants, and palaces glittering with treasures. Yet it was also a city forever caught in the crossfire of Rome's ambitions. When battles reached Alexandria, chaos consumed its streets. Ships burned in the harbor, smoke curled into the sky, and soldiers clashed in alleys where scholars once debated philosophy. The great library of Alexandria, already weakened by earlier disasters, suffered again. Scrolls vanished in flames, records were lost in confusion, and knowledge that had survived centuries dissolved into ash. Among those lost records were whispers of Cleopatra's pyramid project. Blueprints scribbled on papyrus, coded notes from architects, and ritual instructions from priests may have been stored in the city's archives. If so, they were consumed in the inferno, leaving only fragments of rumor behind. What had been carefully hidden in secrecy was erased by accident, swallowed by war. Cleopatra herself fought desperately to preserve her city. She rallied allies, negotiated with generals, and tried to shield Alexandria from Rome's wrath. But even her brilliance could not stop the tide. Rome's hunger was too great, and Egypt's strength too fragile. The fall of Alexandria was not just the loss of a city, it was the unraveling of Cleopatra's dream. The humor, if any, lay in the irony. Cleopatra had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep her pyramid secret, disguising stones, whispering rituals, inventing codes, only for history to erase the evidence in one sweeping blaze. Her secrecy was undone not by spies, but by fire. And so, the fall of Alexandria became part of the legend. It was the moment when Egypt's last queen watched her city burn, her records vanish, and her hidden pyramid fade into myth. What remained was not stone, but story, fragments carried by rumor. waiting for future generations to wonder what secrets had been lost in the flames. Cleopatra's secret pyramid was a dream that shimmered in the desert sands, but never solidified into stone. The reasons for its incompletion were as layered as the blocks that were meant to build it: politics, finances, secrecy, and the sheer impossibility of hiding a monument the size of a mountain. First came the financial strain. Egypt's treasury was already stretched thin by Rome's demands, debts, and Cleopatra's constant need to bribe allies. Even disguised as bread loaves or festival decorations, the costs of hauling limestone drained resources faster than the Nile in flood season. The accountants groaned, the priests whispered, and the workers muttered that eternity was too expensive. Then came the political chaos. Rome's grip tightened, and Cleopatra's alliances with Caesar and Antony pulled her into wars that consumed her attention. Alexandria burned, records vanished, and secrecy became harder to maintain. A pyramid could not rise quietly when legions marched and spies lurked in every marketplace. There was also the practical absurdity. You cannot build a pyramid in secret. Even at night, the hauling of blocks echoed across villages. Donkeys brayed, workers stumbled, and gossip spread. Cleopatra's dream of a hidden monument was undone by the simple fact that pyramids are designed to be seen. Finally, there was time itself. Cleopatra's reign was consumed by survival, balancing Egypt against Rome's hunger, protecting her throne, and navigating alliances that shifted like desert winds. The pyramid project, though dear to her heart, became a luxury she could not afford. Her energy was spent on politics, not stone. The humor of its incompletion lies in its paradox. Cleopatra wanted a pyramid that was eternal yet invisible, monumental yet secret. It was a contradiction too great even for Egypt's last queen to solve. And so the pyramid was never completed. What remains is not stone but story, a legend of ambition, secrecy, and a queen who tried to outwit history with geometry. The unfinished pyramid became her most mysterious monument, built not in limestone but in whispers. Cleopatra's secret pyramid project was not only haunted by spies and secrecy, but also by strange tales of workers who disappeared into the sands. These stories, whispered among laborers and passed down through generations, gave the project an eerie aura, half comedy, half ghost story. Some workers claimed that the desert swallowed men whole. One night, a crew hauling blocks vanished, leaving only donkeys braying at the edge of the dunes. Another tale spoke of a group of architects who entered the hidden vault to measure its walls and never returned, as if the pyramid itself had decided to keep them. The priests offered explanations steeped in mysticism. They said the gods demanded sacrifices, that the pyramid consumed souls to strengthen its foundations. Workers, less poetic, muttered that the men had simply run away to avoid back-breaking labor. After all, hauling limestone at midnight was hardly anyone's dream job. Cleopatra herself encouraged the legends. She believed that mystery added power to her project. If workers vanished, she declared it was proof the pyramid was sacred. "The gods guard our secret," she whispered, though her accountants suspected the gods were simply guarding unpaid wages. The humor of these stories lay in their contradictions. Some tales were terrifying, others absurd. One rumor claimed a worker disappeared after mistaking a block for a loaf of bread and trying to eat it. Another insisted that a priest vanished because he whispered too loudly during a ritual. Whether true or not, the legends of vanished workers became part of the myth. They added a layer of mystery to Cleopatra's unfinished pyramid, turning ordinary accidents and desert dangers into supernatural tales. The project was no longer just about stone and secrecy. It was about whispers of men lost to the sands, leaving behind echoes that made the pyramid seem alive. Centuries after Cleopatra's reign, whispers of her secret pyramid project resurfaced in the most unlikely way, through fragments of forgotten blueprints discovered among ruins. Archaeologists digging in the sands near Alexandria claimed to find papyrus scraps covered in strange sketches, triangles, corridors, and symbols that didn't quite match any known pyramid design. The fragments were puzzling. Some showed staircases leading nowhere. Others depicted chambers labeled with cryptic hieroglyphs like House of Secrets or Vault of Silence. One drawing even appeared to be a pyramid upside down, which scholars debated endlessly. Was it a mistake, a joke, or Cleopatra's attempt to confuse future looters? Legends grew around these scraps. Some said they were genuine blueprints from Cleopatra's underground architects, hidden in temple archives before Alexandria burned. Others insisted they were forgeries, doodles made by bored scribes who liked triangles. A few romantics believed they were part of Cleopatra's legacy chamber plan, proof that she had indeed tried to preserve her story in stone. The humor lay in the scholars' debates. One insisted the drawings proved Cleopatra wanted a pyramid shaped like a loaf of bread. Another argued the upside-down pyramid was a metaphor for secrecy. A third declared the fragments were simply shopping lists disguised as geometry. Cleopatra, had she been listening, would have laughed at their confusion. Whether authentic or not, the forgotten blueprint became part of the myth. It was a tantalizing glimpse into what might have been a queen's dream sketched in ink, lost in fire, and rediscovered as fragments that kept historians arguing for centuries. And so, the blueprint in ruins added another layer to Cleopatra's legend, a reminder that even unfinished dreams can leave traces, waiting for future generations to puzzle over triangles in the sand. Cleopatra's secret pyramid was never completed, yet its legend endured. History, ever selective, chose to hide her ambition beneath layers of rumor, myth, and silence. Rome's chroniclers painted her as a temptress, a schemer, a queen undone by passion, but they rarely mentioned her dream of stone rising in the desert. The pyramid became invisible, not because it was small, but because history itself decided not to see it. The fragments of her plan whispered rituals, disguised stones, vanished workers, forgotten blueprints were scattered like grains of sand. Each piece hinted at something grand, yet none revealed the whole. Scholars argued, priests speculated, storytellers embroidered tales, but the truth remained hidden. Cleopatra's pyramid was less a monument of limestone than a monument of secrecy, preserved in shadows rather than sunlight. Perhaps that was her final victory. By hiding her plans so well, she ensured that future generations would forever wonder. Was there a pyramid buried in the forbidden desert? Did her architects truly sketch impossible designs? Did Rome's spies almost uncover the truth? History cannot answer, and so the mystery lingers. The humor lies in the paradox. Cleopatra wanted a pyramid that was eternal yet unseen, monumental yet secret, and in a way she succeeded. Her pyramid exists not in stone but in story, not in the desert but in our imagination. It is the monument that cannot be looted, cannot be burned, cannot be erased, because it was never fully built. And so, the tale drifts to its close. Cleopatra's secret pyramid remains hidden in the sands of time, a dream half real, half myth, waiting for eternity to whisper its secrets. The story ends here, softly, like a desert wind, fading into silence. Close your eyes, let the mystery rest, and carry the legend into your dreams. Good night.